Some years ago I was invited by the National Maritime Museum at Greenwich, no less, to give a lecture on Viking navigation. Well, I thought to myself, I don't think I know much about that, I'm not really qualified, am I? But then I thought some more about it, and the first thing that occurred to me was this: nobody else knows much about it either. And then the real crunch was that actually I am qualified, because I have done the trip from Norway to the New World that was done in the 10th century by the Vikings when they discovered America. I've done it myself in my own pilot cutter back in the early 1980s with a crew of all sorts of characters and my wife and my little daughter. We did it. And I wrote a book about it called Topsail and Battle Axe, which won the Best Book of the Sea Award. And there was part of the book was about my trip, but a lot of it was about the Norse navigation. So book went out of print, of course, years ago, but I've made an audio book about it now, and you can buy it on my website. But this is not a commercial for the book. Just don't forget that, though, because you might enjoy it. What it's about is about how America came to be discovered in the 10th century, and about the navigation, particularly, that led to that. Because these guys, they weren't like us. I mean, my boat now, not like the old pilot cutter, which had nothing in the way of modern aids, but the boat I have now is bristling with kit. I've got full Brooks and Gatehouse, and isn't it a wonderful thing? My plotter tells me where I am to the width of my cockpit, and it'll tell me which way to go. It'll tell me whether anybody's coming to run me down. It's absolutely amazing. And I don't know about you, but you've probably got a lot of this kit on your boat too. And have you ever had it go down? Well, to its credit, the B&G hasn't gone down, but the kit I had before did once, and you get so used to it that when it stops, you get this horrible feeling in the pit of your stomach. You think, oh, well, what am I going to do now? Well, it wasn't like that for the Vikings, because they had absolute zilch. We rely, even if we haven't got a plotter, we assume we got a chart and a compass, don't we? I mean, that's basic, because if you've got a chart and a compass, you're in with a chance of doing a dead reckoning position. They had no charts. They had no compass, and they had no real idea of longitude. Blimey, how did they manage then? Well, let's take a look at it. There was a man called Eric the Red, and he lived in Iceland. His dad was a bit of a shady character who'd been kicked out of Norway for killing people, and Eric followed the family tradition, and when he became to be a fine young man with a big red beard and all the rest of it, he started falling out with his neighbours too. It was a great tradition in the family, and he knocked them on the head. They came fighting back. There was a bit of a pitched battle. Eric came out on top, and the neighbours didn't like it. They said to him, "Look, Eric, you've got to go." Now, this is an oversimplification. Actually, there are all sorts of court hearings and things under the mountain, but we won't go there. Just take it from me, Eric got kicked out of Iceland. And where is he going to go? He can't go back to Norway because his dad was a bit of a bad hat. So there was land rumoured to the westward, and Eric decided to go and have a look at that. So he got in his Canar. Now, this is a vessel that was used by the Norse for far-ranging voyaging. It's not a long ship. A long ship was long, and it had shields down the side, and it was very sexy, and it was very fast, and it was full of berserks crowding the bows and waiting to go ranting ashore and commit all the dreadful deeds that they did. Knock a few priests on the head and the rest of it. So he didn't have one of them. He had a Canar, and a Canar was a trading ship, 50, 60, maybe even longer than that. She was beamy. She was deep-bodied, and she was seaworthy. She was partly decked, she had a single square sail, and she could carry a lot of cargo, and they sailed remarkably well, these vessels. They would work to windward, not sharply, but they would get up there. And of course, downwind, they were a bit of a powerhouse. They reckoned they could make up to 10 knots downwind, and recreations of these vessels has shown that that's the case. So Eric got in his Canar with his family and his ox and his ass and the rest of it, and he pushed off westward, where land was rumoured to exist. How did he know he was going west? Well, the setting sun goes west, doesn't it? He knew that. It was not pure west up in those latitudes, but it was good enough. He knew where north was, because if he could see the North Star, which at spring and autumn he probably would be able to see, not in high summer up there, but in the turning of the year he could. That gave him an idea. And of course, in the middle of the day, they knew that the sun was due south. And they would have had a pretty good idea when the middle of the day was, even though they had no watch. That was another thing they didn't have. No watch, no real concept of time in minutes and seconds, just in terms of days. But that was enough, because when you don't have these things, you become much more sensitive to what you have got. And you become a great observer too. And Eric would have used things like orographic clouds to see where the land was coming up. You can see them long before you see land if you know what you're looking for, particularly in northern latitudes. There's a photo of one here that I took in northern Norway once. These clouds sit over the top of mountains in certain conditions. The mountains themselves are snow covered and they'll show up too. And when Eric set off, he set Snæfellsjökull, this one here. He put it behind him as he sailed away to the westward, hoping for a better life. He let it stay there until it dipped below the horizon. By then he'd be a long way out to sea. He'd be able to see the run of the sea, to see which way it was relating to his course when he was going westward. So if the sky disappeared from clouds, he had the run of the sea to guide him. And if the wind shifted, he could see the wind blowing on the sea, he'd see it move, and he could make decisions based on this. And he had the birds, the good old birds. Some of them aren't much good. It's hard to tell what's happening by looking at a shearwater like this one. But if you look at a gannet, if it's not diving for food, is usually on passage somewhere, and if it's going your way, it's probably going towards the land. So if all else fails, follow the gannet and that'll get you there. Well, Eric toddled across the Denmark Strait, and he found Greenland. It wasn't called Greenland then, it didn't have a name, but he found a great big country, and it was cold and it was a bit miserable, so he turned left and he went down to the southward. And there, the coast trended away to the westward and then up to the north. He'd found Cape Farewell at the southern end of Greenland. And away he went to the north until he found some fjords. And he went ashore there, and it wasn't bad, you know. There was pasture land and there was rivers with salmon in them, and he thought to himself, I could make a colony here. I don't have to go back and get involved with all that nonsense in Iceland. I could start here. I'll go back to Iceland, round up a few of my mates, and we'll come down here and we'll start a colony. And I'll call the place Greenland, because they'll like that, because there's not much green about Iceland, and anything that's called green will attract people. So there you go. The first ever real estate scam, promulgated by Eric the Red himself. Well, he went and found his mates. They all came down and they set up a colony. Now, one of these chaps was Herjolf. Herjolf had known Eric's dad. He was an oldish fella, and he had a boy called Bjarni. And Bjarni was a young man by now, and Bjarni was a trader working between Norway and Iceland, and he did very well out of this. He used to bring luxury goods from Norway, and when he got there, his dad would help him disperse them through the country, and they worked as traders. They were getting rich. Bjarni arrived from Norway with a ship full of goods, and his dad wasn't there. What's he going to do? Well, here is what happened to Bjarni, and here is how North America got discovered. Bjarni knew that his dad had gone round Cape Farewell with Eric. He'd never been to Greenland, nobody had, apart from the guys who'd already gone, but they would have left word about the geographic location of Cape Farewell. They knew it was out to the west, and they knew what its latitude was, because although they didn't know about longitude, they were a bit shaky about whether the world was round. They did know about latitude. It was pretty primitive, and they didn't have it in numbers, but they knew that one location would have the pole star at a given height all the year round, and it would never change. And that's how it is today. Nothing changes. The pole star will give you a latitude. Now, it happened that the latitude of Cape Farewell was the same as the latitude of Bergen. So if he could find himself on the latitude of Bergen and he was to the east of Cape Farewell, he'd be able to find it, because all he had to do was turn west and run along the latitude until he got there. How did he find the latitude? Well, this is up for debate, but there's nothing to say that he didn't do it like this. He got himself a long stick. He held it at arm's length, and he put one end on the horizon. He'd held it loosely so that it held vertically, and he would make a mark on it of some sort, maybe put a nail in or something, where he could see the pole star. And that gave him the latitude of Bergen. If he was out in the Atlantic, he could always find that place by getting the pole star in the right spot on his stick and then running east or west. So, sets out for Cape Farewell, steers south and west. He's not bothered if he gets there or not, because if he doesn't find it, he'll be on the latitude and he can turn west and he will find it. He was doing really well. He had a good fair wind and he cracked on down there. And then, unfortunately, just before he got to the corner, he got hit by a howler of a gale, a real storm of a wind, and it drove him away to the south. He ran before it, as any prudent seaman would in such a vessel. And after several days, he didn't know where he was anymore, because the sky cleared up. It didn't look such a bad situation, but he hadn't got a clue where he was. He knew he was somewhere to the south of Cape Farewell, in a big sort of lozenge of position, if you like, but where in it, he hadn't got a clue. So he's got three choices. Either he shoots for Cape Farewell. Well, nobody would do that, would they? Because your chances of hitting it are practically nil. And when you hit the latitude, you won't know which way to turn. If you go right, you might end up in Europe or Shetlands or somewhere. If you go left, you could get lucky. But who's to know? Who's to know? If you go well up to the right, then you can turn to port and you will find it. Or you can go well up to the west and turn to starboard when you hit the latitude. And that's what he decided to do, because he didn't want to risk going the other way, just in case he'd already been set down to the eastward. And he ended up in Ireland, and that would have been catastrophic, because his crew would have mutinied and that would have been the end of that. So he decided to go to the west. Good decision. There was no land there as far as he knew, and he could just sail away until all was finished. So off he went, and he found land. The next day he made landfall, and I believe that that landfall was Newfoundland. All the evidence that I've been able to amass about how far he went in terms of days run and everything else suggests that that was it. Also, what happened subsequently. He didn't go ashore in Newfoundland. His lads wanted to go. Of course they would, wouldn't you? If you'd been out at sea for all that time and had a storm of wind and there's a lovely bit of land there, you'd want to go ashore. Try your luck. See what there was. What sailor wouldn't? But Bjarne would have none of it. He said, no, boys, we're here to deliver the cargo. We'll deliver the cargo and we'll get rich. If we get sidetracked, we'll end up there all winter and it'll turn to rats. We're not doing it. We're going back out to sea. And he went out to sea, still steering north and west. The land disappeared, and a couple of days later he found more land, and that was Labrador. He worked his way up Labrador and finally came to the top of it, Cape Chidley. And guess what? It's 60 degrees north latitude, the same height of the pole star as Bergen and Cape Farewell. So he cracked it. He turned to starboard and he ran down across that wide expanse of sea, and in the fullness of time, Greenland's icy mountains came up, just as they did for me all those years ago, and just as they have for so many others, and he knew he was there. He found his father's fjord, he got a hero's welcome, he sold his goods and he got rich. Now, some years later, Eric's boy, Leif, decided he wanted to go a Viking. And there was nowhere for him to go. No rape and pillage to be had in Greenland. He wouldn't get a good reception back in Iceland, would he? So he decided he'd go and have a look for Bjarne's land. He bought Bjarne's canard and he went down to the south and west, and he got lucky. He found what I believe is Newfoundland. He found a great big wide, what he took to be a fjord, but which actually I think was the Belle Isle Strait. And he set up some booths there in which he could live for the winter. Others followed him, and they built longhouses and made a little settlement. It didn't last long, but they were there and they did it. And that settlement has been found, and it's been excavated by Helge Ingstad, the Danish historian. And they have built some longhouse replicas alongside it, all turf-roofed. What an atmospheric place. And that is where we finished our voyage, standing where Leif Erikson stood, looking out to the northward at the northern lights, and knowing that we were in the wake of one of the greatest navigators of all time, Bjarne Herjolfsson. What a guy.